The Assembly will hear an address by Her Excellency Robina Nabanja, Prime Minister and Leader of Government Business in Parliament of the Republic of Uganda. I request protocol to escort Her Excellency and invite her to address the Assembly.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I bring you warm greetings from His Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, the President of the Republic of Uganda, and the people of Uganda. I congratulate His Excellency Mr. Philemon Yang on his election as President of the 79th session of the UN General Assembly, and I assure him of Uganda's full support. I commend His Excellency Mr. Dennis Francis, former President to the General Assembly, for his stewardship of the 78th session of the General Assembly, and equally pay tribute to the Secretary General, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, for his commitment to the work of the United Nations. Mr. President, in the face of the current global shocks occasioned by multiple human, natural, ecological, sociological, and financial crises, we can all agree that the world is not in a good place. Today, the negative consequences of disunity have given rise to conflicts, global instability, interstate rivalry, and has worsened the already existing problems of poverty, hunger, and disease in many parts of the world. There is therefore need to recommit ourselves to a common identity of shared humanity in the modern global village. As people of the United Nations, we should live by the Charter of the United Nations with a sincere determination to save future generations from the scourge of war. We should fully commit ourselves to upholding the dignity and worth of human person for peaceful coexistence and tolerance regardless of our differences in values, cultures, race, ideologies, and religions without political, military threats or dominion by war. Your Excellencies, we must resolve our political commitment for the full implementation of the globally agreed frameworks for the promotion of socio-economic development and advancement of all people. In this regard, Your Excellency, urgent action is required to address global inequalities with regard to poverty, hunger, and disease, which continue to affect disproportionately the poorest and most vulnerable. Therefore, this is the time to ask the following questions. Why have we failed to forge stronger international cooperation in response to collective global challenges? The second question is, why is it that, in spite of the multiple global commitments derived through conceptually formulated solutions, decisions, and commitments, do all these remain unimplemented? This year's General Assembly, unlike others, should seek to answer these questions. Mr. President, we are all aware that most conflict drivers begin as unresolved local or regional tensions or problems, which become increasingly complex, sometimes involving multiple actors. Regional conflicts must be addressed comprehensively beyond security, with the need for broad and strong political commitments by the regional governments. Uganda believes in the peaceful resolution of conflicts wherever they occur. We are at the forefront of promoting regional peace, security, and stability necessary for economic development. In this respect, Uganda encourages international partners to support local and regional-led initiatives or solutions for building peace and stability as prerequisites for sustained and inclusive economic growth and development in our countries and regions. We call on the increased collaboration by the international community to eliminate or reduce the incidence of conflicts caused by factors such as inequality, climate change, pandemics, new technologies, transitional organized crime, and terrorism. Uganda believes that the benefits of this world must be shared with all humanity and detests all forms of exclusion by the relatively few wealthy nations. We reject the increasing competition and confrontation between major powers, which undermines the collective international responses to security, peace, stability, and socio-economic development. Your Excellencies, Uganda reiterates its call for the urgent and comprehensive reform of the UN Security Council for Africa to be represented in both permanent and non-permanent categories as a special case in order to address the historical injustice and the urgent imperative to address it, and fully supports the common African position on this matter. The African Union Committee of 10 heads of state, under the leadership of the Republic of Sierra Leone, has been pursuing the mandate to promote, advocate, and canvass for support of the common African position on the reform of the United Nations Security Council as stipulated in the Ezurini Consensus and the Sati Declaration. The position is that Africa should have 2 permanent seats with a veto if others have it, and 2 additional non-permanent seats on the Security Council. The Committee of 10, since 2005, has been driven with the hope and conviction of sovereign equality in representation and participation in intergovernmental negotiations for the reform of the UN Security Council to make it more responsive to the current circumstances to achieve a future of shared goals for humanity. The core aspiration is for Africa to get representation in United Nations Security Council as equal partners and make a contribution to multilateral systems that should become inclusive, equitable, and work for international peace and security of all without paralysis or succumbing to parochial interests of major powers. Mr. President, we demand for the right to development as equal members of the international community without any preconditions and politicization, for greater human dignity, freedom, and socio-economic injustice. We call for fair access to means of production, technology, and capital for the socio-economic transformation of our economies in line with our national legal frameworks and development plans. Uganda believes that the perpetual preservation of poverty and inequalities in developing countries undermines the fundamental human rights, in particular the rights of the marginalized and the poor, and remains a threat to international peace and security, which should no longer be overlooked. Uganda, as a chair of non-allied movement, will work with countries of the non-allied movement as well as other countries on the intergovernmental processes that shall lead to the adoption of the UN Covenant on the Right to Development. Mr. President, financing remains one of the greatest challenges that undermine the efforts of developing countries to fully implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and achievement of its 17 sustainable goals. Borrowing is critical for financing investments in sustainable development. Sovereign debt is an important tool for financing sustainable development, enabling low-income countries to invest in infrastructure, health, education, and other critical areas. We emphasize that loans to low-income developing countries should be concessional and at zero interest rate. This will enable our countries to finance productive investments, including building infrastructure to improve connectivity, make debt sustainable in the long run, and spur economic growth, which will in turn help to improve domestic tax collection and raise revenues. Uganda, like other developing countries, faces constraints of domestic resource mobilization due to limited tax base. We call for strengthening of the international cooperation in tax matters to ensure that it is effective and inclusive by making multinational corporations pay taxes in countries of their operations, including collecting revenue generated by e-commerce in cross-border transactions. Mr. President, we fully support the ongoing discussions on adoption of the UN Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation and call upon all countries to negotiate constructively. We also call for the strengthening of international cooperation in the prevention of and combating illicit financial flows, with a view of ensuring that all illicit funds, all resources, including assets, are returned to their countries of origin. Furthermore, Uganda calls for the urgent reform of the international financial architecture, including the international financial institutions and their rules, to ensure equitable representation of developing countries in international economic governance decision-making that affect the trajectory of their national development. Your Excellencies, Uganda identified 4 key sectors of wealth and job creation in line with its national development plan, and that includes agro-processing, industrialization, services, information and communication technologies, digitalization, and skills development to support our socio-economic transformation. There is no doubt that affordable energy and access to affordable high-quality internet connectivity is vital to catalyze their full implementation in order to realize inclusive development outcomes and benefits for our people. We need to strengthen deeper collaboration with the Global South with the support of our partners in the north to unlock shared prosperity by building the necessary infrastructure and connectivity to increase productive capacity for rapid growth, economic takeoff, and sustainable development. In this regard, Uganda calls on the international community to support the full implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Furthermore, Uganda calls on the international community to support its path to sustainable development. We encourage foreign individuals and companies to invest in the country. We welcome inflows of money, technology, knowledge, skills, and expertise as major sources of non-debt financial resources for economic development of our country. Your Excellencies, Uganda also calls for collaboration by the international community in medical research for global health to develop vaccines and treatments to combat diseases like Ebola, COVID-19, monkeypox, and improving healthcare capability in low-income countries, particularly in Africa. Uganda advocates for mutually beneficial trade and investment. We encourage that in pursuing sustainable development, foreign direct investment should be geared to adding value by processing raw materials inside our country, where raw materials are produced, and to export high-value products. This will create jobs, generate high incomes, and increase taxable revenues. We call on multinational companies to desist from purchasing raw materials and only selling processed products for consumption in developing countries. We equally call on developed economies and multinational companies that buy raw materials to process them and add value in their countries should take measures to institute policies that allow sharing the profits they generate in the value chain with the low-income raw material producing countries where it is sourced for shared prosperity. Mr. President, climate change remains one of the greatest challenges to the pursuit of sustainable development. Uganda calls on developed countries to provide the necessary financial, technical, as well as capacity building to support developing countries to effectively address climate change. We demand for climate justice, recognizing that richer countries, having historically profited from high emission activities for the development of their economies, and bear a great obligation to lead in mitigating these impacts. Therefore, high-income countries should reduce their emissions and equally support developing countries in their gradual transition to low-emission development pathways without using the environment as a political and economic tool to block or slow down their development. We emphasize that climate finance should be additional to official development assistance. Mr. President, developing countries face great challenges, including the increase in unilateral political, economic, and trade actions, or policies, and the weakening of multilateralism, which are flagrant violations of the principles established in the UN Charter, international law, and the purposes of the United Nations. We consider that it is urgent to stop these actions that threaten the economic and social development of the countries that are subject to them, and consequently prevent them from achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Uganda reiterates its call to put to an end to the economic, commercial, and financial blockade imposed on these sister nations under sanctions, which is a major impediment to the sustainable development. Uganda also reiterates its firm rejection to the imposition of laws and regulations with extraterritorial impact and all other forms of coercive measures, including unilateral sanctions against developing countries, and reiterates the urgent need to eliminate them immediately. Mr. President, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Uganda took over the chairmanship of both the Group of 77 and China and the Non-Allied Movement in January 2024. I take this opportunity on behalf of His Excellency President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, the President of the Republic of Uganda, to thank all member states of the group and the movement for their confidence in ensuring Uganda is in the capacity of chair. We commend the Africa Group for endorsing our candidature for the chairmanship of both organizations. This year 2024, has been a crucial year with various intergovernmental processes at the United Nations on issues that are of paramount importance to both the group and the movement. And these include inter alia Fourth International Conference on the Small Islands Developing States, the Third UN Conference on the Landlocked Developing Countries, the Summit of the Future, the preparations for the Fourth International Conference on Financing for Development, the 2024 UN Climate Change Conference, COP29, all of which demand that we remain even more united and steadfast in promoting the interests of developing countries. Uganda therefore commends the members of both groups for keeping united in solidarity as we pursue the issues of our common interests. In conclusion, Mr. President, Uganda will continue with this stewardship, working together in solidarity to achieve a revitalized multilateral system which is capable of adequately addressing current and emerging global challenges. We firmly believe that multilateralism remains a fundamental and crucial mechanism for addressing our common challenges, namely, 1, accelerating the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. 2, scaling up action to address climate change and biodiversity loss. 3, strengthening international tax cooperation. Then 4, availing adequate concessional financing for development. And number 5, the fight against illicit financial flows and enhancing global collaboration in digital and artificial technologies to maximize the benefit to society and minimize harm, among others. I thank you for God and my country.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister and Leader of Government Business in Parliament of the Republic of Uganda. We have heard the last speaker in the general debate for this meeting.